What if the two most powerful intercessors in the history of the Christian faith were placed specifically for a moment like this one, for the exact kind of pressure, impossibility, and urgency that millions of people are carrying right now in 2026? I'm not talking about religious sentiment or Sunday morning comfort. I'm talking about real spiritual firepower for real-life situations that have no visible human solution. Stay with me through this entire video because before it ends, we're going to pray together, and something is going to shift. There's something happening right now that no analyst and no algorithm fully predicted. Across every demographic, across every income level, across every corner of this country, people are quietly reaching for something that goes beyond what their bank account, their therapist, or their social media feed can offer. They're reaching for intercession. They're reaching for saints who walked through fire and came out on the other side with something worth passing on. And two names keep rising to the surface with a frequency and an urgency that feels anything but accidental: Saint Expeditus and Saint Rita of Cassia. Now, before you write that off as old-world religion that doesn't apply to your situation, let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a position where you needed a breakthrough and you needed it fast? Where waiting another month, another week, another day felt like it might cost you everything? Where the problem in front of you didn't just feel hard, it felt genuinely, categorically impossible. If any part of that landed, then what I'm about to share with you was made for this moment in your life. Saint Rita of Cassia is known throughout the Catholic tradition as the patron of impossible causes. That title didn't come from a marketing team. It came from centuries of documented testimonies from real people in real crises who brought the most hopeless situations imaginable before this woman's intercession and watched things change. A marriage that was declared over. A diagnosis that had no good outcome. A family member so lost that everyone around them had stopped praying. These are the kinds of cases that landed at Rita's feet, and these are the kinds of cases where breakthrough kept happening in ways that defied the expected outcome. Saint Expeditus operates in a different but equally critical lane. He's invoked specifically for urgent situations, for those moments when time itself feels like it's working against you. When the deadline is real. When the window is closing. When the situation demands movement right now and not in some vague future timeframe. The tradition around his intercession is ancient, consistent, and deeply practical. He's not the patron of things that can wait. He's the patron of what needs to happen today. And here's what makes 2026 a moment where these two figures become particularly relevant. We're living through a convergence of pressures that most people in this generation have never experienced simultaneously. Economic uncertainty that touches every household regardless of zip code. Relational strain that's fracturing families from the inside. A global atmosphere of instability that makes even people who consider themselves spiritually grounded feel the weight of things outside their control. What this season produces in people is a very specific kind of desperation, not the kind that leads to giving up, but the kind that strips away every lesser option until you're standing before something larger than yourself with your hands open. That's exactly the posture that both Rita and Expeditus were built for. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that the tradition surrounding both of these saints was forged in impossibility. Rita lived through the murder of her husband and both of her sons. She carried a wound from the crown of thorns on her own forehead as a sign of union with the suffering of Christ. She didn't encounter hardship from a distance. She lived inside it, and she emerged not broken but transformed into one of the most powerful intercessors the Church has ever recognized. When you bring your impossible situation to her, you're not bringing it to someone who offers sympathy from a safe distance. You're bringing it to someone who went further into the darkness than most of us will ever go and found light on the other side. What this does for the person in crisis is something that no self-help framework can fully replicate. There's a concept in psychology called mirroring, the experience of seeing your own struggle reflected in someone else's story and feeling for the first time that your experience is real, valid, and not unique to you. When believers engage with the story of Rita's life, something happens that goes beyond doctrinal instruction. They see themselves. They see their broken marriage. They see their child who won't come home. They see their health scare that the doctors can't resolve. And they see that someone who walked through something worse came through it with grace intact. That mirroring creates what I'd call resilient faith. Faith that doesn't shatter when the next bad news comes because it's built on something that has already survived the worst. The same principle applies to how communities of believers interact around these devotions. When someone shares a testimony of answered prayer, a job that came through at the last possible moment, a relationship that was restored after years of silence, a financial breakthrough that had no logical explanation, that testimony doesn't just encourage the person who shared it. It expands the faith horizon of everyone who receives it. The miracle that happened to someone else becomes proof of what's possible for your own situation. The specific becomes universal. The personal becomes a promise of potential for every person in the room. This is not naive. This is not wishful thinking dressed up in religious language. This is a centuries-old spiritual technology that operates on principles that are as consistent today as they were when Rita died in 1457 or when the earliest accounts of Expeditus's intercession began circulating through the early church. The framework is simple, but it requires full engagement. You bring the real situation, the whole truth of it, without sanitizing or minimizing. You present it through the intercession of a saint whose entire existence was shaped by the same kind of suffering you're carrying. And you pray with the specific expectation that God responds to that alignment. What this devotion does on the existential level is equally important and not talked about enough. One of the most corrosive forces operating in people's lives right now is fatalism, the creeping certainty that the situation is already decided, that the outcome is already written, that there's no point in fighting for something different. Fatalism is particularly dangerous because it disguises itself as realism. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like maturity. It says things like, I've tried everything, and some things just don't work out, and maybe this is just how it's supposed to be. And while there's a version of surrender that is spiritually healthy and necessary, fatalism is its counterfeit, a form of spiritual shutdown dressed as acceptance. The intercession of Saint Rita and Saint Expeditus is fundamentally an act of resistance against fatalism. To pray through them is to assert that the situation is not closed. It's to declare that what looks impossible from one angle is not impossible from every angle. It's to position yourself within a theological reality where the divine has both the power and the willingness to act in the specific circumstances of your specific life on this specific day. That declaration alone, made with sincerity and with whatever measure of faith you can muster right now, is itself a form of spiritual warfare against the narrative that says nothing can change. And the beauty of this framework is that it meets you wherever you are. You don't need to have it all figured out theologically. You don't need a perfect prayer posture or flawless church attendance or years of spiritual formation before you're qualified to bring your impossible cause before Rita or your urgent need before Expeditus. What's required is honesty and presence. You show up with the real thing, and you place it before intercessors who specialize in exactly that category of need. So where does that leave us practically? It leaves us in the same place that millions of people across every generation of Christian history have landed when the theory ran out and the situation demanded real action. It leaves us in prayer. Not as a closing ritual. Not as a polite ending to a video that talked about spiritual things. But as the actual point of the whole conversation. The moment where everything discussed becomes lived, where faith stops being a concept and starts being an act. If you've been carrying something that feels impossible, a situation that has outlasted your patience, your resources, and your best human strategies, then the prayer we're about to offer together is for you specifically. If you have something urgent pressing on you right now, something with a timeline that feels unbearable, then bring it into this moment. Don't hold it back. Don't dress it up. Bring the real thing. Let's pray. Lord, through the intercession of Saint Rita of Cassia, patron of impossible causes, and Saint Expeditus, advocate of urgent needs, we lift before you every situation in this community that has been labeled hopeless, every circumstance that feels too far gone, every door that looks permanently closed. We declare today that nothing is beyond your reach. We ask for breakthrough where there has been only wall. We ask for speed where time has felt like an enemy. We ask for restoration where only loss has been visible. Meet us in the impossible. Move in the urgent. Let the same power that transformed Rita's suffering into glory and answered the most desperate prayers of those who called on these saints reach into the specific situations of every person watching this right now. If that prayer touched something in you, if something shifted even slightly in your spirit as you prayed along, don't move on from this moment without subscribing to Living Hope. This channel exists for exactly this, to bring you the spiritual tools, the real stories of faith, and the prayer that matches what you're actually going through. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss what we put out, and leave a comment below telling us what you brought into that prayer today. Your testimony is someone else's breakthrough. Share this video with the person in your life who needs a reminder that their impossible situation has not been abandoned by heaven. We'll see you in the next one.